Today, we're digging into something every digital creative team feels, but rarely gets a clean map for: how different programmatic platforms treat your HTML5 ads, automation, and dynamic creative. If you've ever had a banner approved in one DSP and rejected in another, this one's for you.
Exactly. This isn't about bids and audiences. It's about specs, file sizes, workflows, and how tools like Viewst can turn banner production into real infrastructure instead of last-minute chaos.
Let's set the scene first. Why do platform specs matter so much for creative leaders, beyond the usual keep it under X kilobytes advice?
Because the real bottleneck isn't ideas, it's production friction. Resizing, compressing, fixing rejected zips, and making endless variants for AI-driven and DCO campaigns. Different DSPs have their own rules on file sizes, animation length, and click behavior, and when you multiply that by dozens of sizes and languages, workload explodes. That's why creative automation tools like Viewst are being treated as infrastructure between design tools like Figma and Adobe and platforms like DV360 or Amazon DSP.
Let's walk through the big platforms, starting with Google, since a lot of teams live in DV360 and CM360. How does the Google stack shape HTML5 production?
With Google, you're really designing for three products: DV360 for media, CM360 as the ad server, and Studio for complex, rich media. DV360 wants HTML5 as zips, roughly up to 5 megabytes total download, with limits on HTTP calls, cookies, and animation capped at 30 seconds across core sizes like 300 by 250, 728 by 90, and various mobile units.
And CM360 adds its own layer, right?
Yes, CM360 lets you upload HTML5 zips, or ADZ files, up to 9.5 megabytes, with up to 100 files inside and a root-level HTML using Google's click tag implementation. They also recommend a small, polite load image under about 40 kilobytes, which pushes teams to think about initial load versus everything else.
So, from a workflow angle, what does that mean for a head of creative working in the Google world?
It means you need consistent HTML5 templates that can compile into DV360 and CM360 compliant zips, and a single master creative that respects both the 5 megabyte live cap and the 9.5 megabyte upload cap. For more advanced rich media like expandables, you're still going Studio to CM360 to DV360, so having modular, reusable assets is key. That's where something like Viewst sits upstream. Import a master from Figma, use AI Smart Resize to generate all Google core sizes, and export DV360/CM360 ready zips without hand coding.
Now, let's contrast that with Amazon DSP, which has a reputation for being strict. How different is Amazon from Google when it comes to display creative?
Amazon is much tighter on file sizes, especially for standard image units. Many formats are capped at around 50 kilobytes, with some going up to about 200 kilobytes. In the standard display workflow, you can upload up to 10 image assets with a combined maximum of around 500 kilobytes. And HTML5 banners must use Amazon's own click-through SDK, so you can't just drop in an external URL inside the zip.
So, for a design team, that sounds like serious constraints.
It is. Teams need radically lean assets and very aggressive compression while staying on brand. Your HTML5 templates have to be wired to Amazon's SDK click-through function, and if you're running high-volume campaigns across Amazon's 60-plus sizes, you really benefit from smart resize and tight variant control. A tool like Viewst can keep a single master creative as the source of truth, generate Amazon-compliant static or HTML5 versions in bulk, and export with the correct click-through integration preset.
Let's jump to the trade desk, because it's often described as more flexible and API-driven. From a creative ops standpoint, what stands out with TTD?
The trade desk supports image, HTML5, native, video, and audio creatives, and you can upload via REST, GraphQL, or the UI, but the specs can vary by supply partner. The big differentiator is that it's API first. Their Creative API and Creative Connector let you push creatives and third-party tags in bulk, auto-submit for approvals, and block spending until creatives are cleared.
So if I'm an automation-minded agency, how do I use that?
You standardize your HTML5 structures in a production studio like Viewst, then use TTD's APIs to automate trafficking, approvals, and status checks at scale. It's ideal for organizations that want end-to-end automation, producing, uploading, versioning, and monitoring creatives programmatically instead of manually managing hundreds of files.
Next up, Microsoft's Invest and Monetize, the former Xandr stack. What's unique about Xandr from an HTML5 and template standpoint?
Xandr supports common formats like JPEG, PNG, GIF, DHTML, HTML5, and JavaScript tags, but is pretty specific about HTML5 zip structure. You need a single zip with index.html at the root, a properly referenced click tag, and all assets self-contained inside that zip. No loose ends.
And they also lean heavily into templates, right?
Yes, they offer a creative template service where you can define up to 100 custom templates, and any update to a template can cascade across all creatives using it. That's powerful, but risky. If you break a template, you can trigger mass rejections, so you need tightly governed master templates and version control. Viewst's locked templates and brand books fit well here because they keep changes controlled while still letting you scale variations.
Let's talk about Adform, because unlike many DSPs, it has its own creative studio baked in. How does Adform Studio change the picture for HTML5 and rich media?
Adform is very studio native. You can create, upload, preview, edit, and test HTML5 banners directly in Adform Studio, often using pre-built templates for rich media. Their specs look a lot like classic IAB Rising Star rules, around 40 kilobytes for initial load, 100 to 150 kilobytes for polite load, and about 24 FPS animation for some units.
And there are some structural requirements too, right?
Yes, several templates require a manifest.json at the root of the zip, alongside the HTML file, with assets arranged to match the manifest. Even with Adform Studio, big teams still struggle with versioning across markets, keeping brand books consistent, and managing approvals. That's where an external creative infrastructure like Viewst can own the master creatives and brand systems, then output Adform-compliant HTML5 and rich media variants.
You've mentioned DCO a few times, and that's where complexity really spikes. How do these platforms handle dynamic creative optimization at a high level?
Regardless of platform, DCO needs structured templates with defined dynamic fields, clean mapping between those fields and feed columns, and a way to manage huge variant sets without manual layout work. Google typically uses Studio and CM360 hosted templates with feeds. The Trade Desk often leans on hosted HTML5 plus dynamic tags. Amazon is more constrained and relies heavily on its own retail signals and templated units. And Adform offers template-based dynamic formats driven by manifest.json and HTML placeholders.
So where does a tool like Viewst plug into DCO without trying to replace the DSP logic?
Viewst defines one master creative that sets layout, brand styling, and dynamic zones, then outputs platform-specific HTML5 templates with locked brand books and mapped dynamic fields. The DCO logic, who sees what, is handled by the ad server, or DSP, while Viewst handles the heavy lifting of scaling formats and keeping the brand consistent across all variants.
You also touched on rich media and older IAB Rising Star style formats. What do creative leaders need to remember about those from a production standpoint?
Rich media is basically code-adjacent production. You're dealing with constraints like 40 kilobyte initial load, 100 to 150 kilobyte polite load, 24 frames per second, and sometimes manifest.json plus HTML at the root for mobile units. So QA has to go beyond looks to include load behavior and performance, and it helps to have tools that auto-generate polite load versions, manage manifest files, and enforce payload budgets. Viewst's Instant Animator works in that space by adding motion efficiently while still respecting those initial and polite load limits.
Since AI keeps coming up, let's talk ethics. What are the key principles for using AI in display creative production responsibly?
First, AI should respect expertise. It should handle mechanical tasks like resizes, exports, and simple animation, not replace creative judgment. Second, it has to honor brand books, legal copy, and regulatory constraints with transparency so designers understand and can override what the AI does. And finally, on the DCO side, data privacy and compliance are crucial. Viewst, for instance, positions itself as AI for production around a master creative and locked brand books, keeping humans firmly in control.
Let's get super practical for a moment. If I'm shipping HTML5 banners across these platforms, what's on the one-page QA checklist before upload?
Structurally, you want a single zip per creative, no nested zips, index.html at the root, manifest.json at root where required, clean file naming, and under 100 files if you're going into CM360. For click-throughs, use the right implementation per platform. Google's click tag rules, Amazon's SDK with no hard-coded external URL, and Xandr's click tag conventions, and test clicks across browsers. Then check weight and performance. Stay under the upload and download caps. Keep initial load around 40 kilobytes where required, animation under 30 seconds, and images compressed without ugly artifacts. Finally, verify layout and brand consistency across all key sizes. Ensure localizations and legal text are correct, and preview in each platform to catch rejection reasons early. Automation tools like Viewst can bake many of these checks into export presets.
Zooming out, when does creative automation stop being a nice-to-have and become real infrastructure for a team?
It happens the moment you're juggling multiple DSPs, DV360, Amazon, TTD, Xandr, Adform, and realize a banner that passes one can fail another because specs aren't interchangeable. Workflows are fragmented between design tools, email or Slack, and platform UIs, while workloads keep rising without headcount. Treating banner production as infrastructure means having a master creative as the single source of truth, AI that speeds production without taking over creativity, HTML5 native outputs tailored to each platform, brand governance baked in, and integrated review and approvals. And that's essentially the role Viewst is built to play.
To wrap up, if you had to give one piece of advice to a creative leader drowning in multi-platform specs, what would it be?
Stop treating each banner as a one-off and start treating your system, templates, brand books, and automation as the product. Once you centralize master creatives and let a dedicated production layer translate them into DV360, Amazon, TTD, Xandr, and Adform formats, you free your team to focus on ideas, not file wrangling.
That's a great place to leave it. Platform specs aren't going away, but with the right infrastructure, they stop being a daily fire drill.